A quiet Sunday morning in December 1941, a peaceful harbor, American sailors going about their routines, no air raid sirens, no explosions, no USS Arizona sinking beneath the waves. Pearl Harbor never happens, no sudden declaration of war, no furious America rising in retaliation, no U.S. military machine turning the tide of World War II. It sounds like an alternate history where the world dodged a bullet. But history doesn't just let things slide, because without Pearl Harbor, everything changes. Does America remain neutral while the world burns? Do the Allies fight alone, struggling against an unstoppable Axis war machine? Or does Japan's decision to avoid a sneak attack on the U.S. only lead to a different kind of catastrophe? Let's unravel this chilling alternate reality. The road not taken, Japan's alternate strategy. Why did Japan attack in our timeline? Japan didn't attack Pearl Harbor for fun. It wasn't a chaotic impulse or a case of, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we bombed a superpower? No, Japan was desperate. The U.S. had cut off its oil supply. Economic sanctions were strangling its war machine. America was backing China in the Second Sino-Japanese War. Japan's leaders believed they had one shot: cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet, buy time, and seize enough resources in Southeast Asia to become unstoppable. In our timeline, they rolled the dice, and they lost. But what if they had played it differently? Japan expands without waking the giant toil. In this alternate reality, Japan avoids direct confrontation with the United States. No Pearl Harbor, no direct attack on U.S. soil. Instead, Tokyo focuses on expanding its empire quietly. It invades the Dutch East Indies, seizes Malaya's rich resources, and tightens its grip on Southeast Asia. The war machine gets its oil, rubber, and tin. The empire grows, but America technically stays out of it. The U.S. remains neutral, watching from the sidelines as Asia falls under Japanese control. President Franklin D. Roosevelt might grumble about Japan's aggression, but without a direct attack, his hands are tied. The American public, still isolationist, sees no reason to send their sons to die in a foreign war. But this peaceful expansion doesn't make Japan invincible. The cracks begin to show. Japan's conquests stretch its resources dangerously thin. Governing an empire that spans thousands of miles, not cheap. Resistance movements grow in China, Indonesia, and the Philippines. The further Japan pushes, the more enemies it makes. The Allies, without U.S. intervention, are in serious trouble. Britain is already hanging by a thread fighting Nazi Germany in Europe. Now it has to defend its colonies in Asia, alone. Australia braces for invasion. The British Navy struggles to hold trade routes, and the Soviet Union? Oh, the Soviets are about to have a really bad time. The Axis rising, a war without America. Germany crushes the Soviet Union. In our timeline, the U.S. sent vital supplies to the USSR under the Lend-Lease Act: food, tanks, ammunition, aircraft. Without those shipments, Stalin's army is starving, outgunned, and exhausted. By winter 1942, Moscow falls. The Nazi flag rises over the Kremlin. Stalin flees east, regrouping in Siberia. The Soviet Union fractures. One by one, resistance collapses. Germany becomes the unchallenged master of Europe. The Third Reich isn't just a terrifying dystopian idea, it's reality. Japan's empire expands, but can it hold? Japan now dominates the Pacific. The Philippines, Indonesia, Singapore, all under Japanese control. Key trade routes are militarized. Puppet governments are installed. But there's a problem. Japan's logistical nightmare. Controlling such a massive empire requires resources it doesn't have. Guerrilla resistance erupts in occupied territories. Rebels sabotage supply lines. Japanese troops are constantly fighting insurgents. Japan underestimated how hard it is to maintain an empire the size of an entire continent. And while Japan struggles, Germany is watching. The Axis alliance fractures. Hitler and Hirohito made nice when they had common enemies. But now? Germany wants Central Asia. Japan wants more influence in China. Their interests collide. Who controls India? Britain is weakened, but both Axis powers want a peace. Neither wants to be second place. This is where things get interesting. In our timeline, the Axis was always a marriage of convenience. Now, with no U.S. to unite them against a common enemy, cracks turn into fault lines. Germany eyes Japan's empire with suspicion. Japan wonders if Berlin will start demanding more influence in Asia. Tensions build. How long before former allies become rivals? A dark new world. The war ends, but at what cost? a Nazi Europe, a Japanese Asia. By the late 1940s, the war ends not in triumph for the Allies, but in exhaustion. Britain, isolated, is forced into negotiations. The British Empire fractures. Nazi Germany dominates Europe. Japan holds its empire, but it's a fragile, overstretched behemoth, one rebellion away from chaos. The United States, still watching, still uninvolved. But now it faces a world where two massive Axis powers dominate the planet, and the people living under Axis rule, their nightmare never ended. In Europe, Nazi control is absolute. Resistance is crushed, dissenters disappear. The final solution is fully realized, with no Allied forces to stop it. In Asia, Japan's rule is brutal. Forced labor, military rule, a society built on conquest. Australia and India are left in limbo. Do they align with Japan to survive or face total isolation? But here's the real kicker. The Cold War never happens. No race to the moon, no US dominance, no NATO. Just a world ruled by two rising empires, both waiting for the next fight. Because when one war is avoided, another always takes its place. A world without Pearl Harbor, a nightmare deferred. So what did we learn? No Pearl Harbor, no US entry into World War II. Germany conquers the Soviet Union. Japan builds an empire, but it's stretched too thin. The Axis powers turn on each other. The war doesn't really end, it just changes shape. Maybe we avoided one disaster, but did we just create another? A world dominated by the Axis isn't just different, it's terrifying. So what do you think? Would the Allies have survived without the US? Would Germany and Japan have ruled the world? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And before you go, hit that like button if this alternate timeline made you think. Subscribe for more deep dives into history's greatest what-ifs. Next up, what if World War I never happened? See you there.